I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. If you'll forgive us, strangers, we'd like to start today with a tidbit that you probably have been, and probably will be, subjected to in this last month of the year. We think it's likely that you know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, and Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. Perhaps you'll recall the most famous reindeer of all, Rudolph. And even if gossipy flying deer aren't your thing, you probably know Frosty the Snowman. And, of course, Santa Claus. Younger listeners might lump some others into the same camp. Say your Elf on a Shelf, which is now, for some reason, a whole cinematic universe. Maybe you little freaks even know about Krampus. Now we're going to say something controversial, yet we feel brave. We propose that all of these Yuletide figures are, in their way, cryptids. Think about it. All you really need for a cryptid is a mythos and some belief, right? The subject of today's story should absolutely count as such. Cryptids are monsters, even festive ones. And, after all, when you think of the holiday season, togetherness, treats, peace on earth, and all of that, what does the season conjure up for you if not a giant cat that eats ungrateful children? Everyone does the holidays differently, so please, have some respect for the Nordic people. Yes, strangers, today we are heading to Iceland. And just in case any of you speak the language, we apologize in advance for the pronunciations you are about to have to hear. In our defense, Iceland is very fond of consonants, and we're not sure that they have been made aware of vowels. But in any case, we promise to do our absolute best. Anyway, our Icelandic friends do predominantly celebrate Christmas. They just added a child-eating cat into the mix. That cat's name is Yule Cat, which translates to Yule Cat. And yes, we will be deferring to that translation from this point forward. There are a few things you need to know about the Yule Cat. First up, according to Smithsonian magazine, he belongs to a family of ogres, or trolls, or witches. It varies depending on the retelling, but the family's names are consistent. There's the evil mother, Grilla, and the husband, Lipolo, and their 13 mischievous children, who are often called the Yule Lads. There's a lot to unpack about this family, and their exact characterizations do seem to depend a lot on the source. It's generally agreed that Grilla is the big bad of the family. A blog post that we found, written by an Icelandic travel agent, described her as, quote, a very bad and grim ogre. According to the Daily Star, Grilla and her family live in the mountains most of the year, but, quote, come down around Christmas time to kidnap, cook, and feast on naughty children. To that end, Grilla is often depicted holding a big burlap sack, sometimes filled with screaming human kids. For what it's worth, the younger ogres, they also get in on the fun. Per the Star, quote, the 13 Yule Lads sound benevolent, but are actually evil characters, with sinister names such as Meathook and Window Peeper and Doorway Sniffer, who also devour misbehaving kids. We do wonder, strangers, what a child might do wrong such that their doorway doesn't pass a sniff test, or their window the peep test. And what does meat hooking have to do with, well, anything? But we digress. Let's get back to the cat, shall we? According to Smithsonian magazine, the child-eating ogre's best friend is said to be gigantic, towering above houses. It's unclear if the cat is allowed to be on the ogre's furniture, or if they procure it giant mousy toys. Can ogres buy Meow Mix in bulk? Alas, our questions are really immaterial, because what's really important is what the Yule Cat does and eats on Christmas night. According to Smithsonian magazine, on the evening of December 25th, the cat prowls around towns throughout Iceland, peering in windows to see what children got for Christmas. If they got new clothes, the cat ambles along to the next house. And if a child did not get new clothes, then the Yule Cat assumes that naughty behavior must be to blame, and it enacts its punishment. The child's dinner gets eaten, and then the child does too. Again, the particulars of this process, they shift shape and form depending on who you ask. The Boston Globe elaborates slightly on what good behavior can earn an Icelandic child. It turns out, it's not just avoiding the jaws of Grýla and her giant cat. Quote, if they survive the ogress and the cat, Grýla's 13 sons might leave a gift in shoes placed on windowsills. But if kids continue to misbehave, they'll get rotten potatoes. The premise here, of course, relies on the gift of clothing being an indicator that you were good all year. How naughty does one have to be to not get socks for Christmas? And where on that spectrum do you start qualifying for rotten potatoes in your shoes? We wish that we could tell you, strangers, but just as nobody ever lays out exactly what behavior equals coal in your stocking, we suspect that this is all kept vague on purpose. What's also vague, probably less by design and more by circumstance, is exactly when the Yule Cat became a holiday fixture in Iceland. According to the Travel Channel, we know that Grýla and the Yule Lads have existed for hundreds of years. Grýla's first appearance, as far as we know, was as a giantess in 13th century poetry. She appears to have had a habit of eating children from the beginning, but also killed and devoured her first and second husbands. A girl's gotta eat, we guess. The threat of Grýla coming to eat any child who stepped out of line, it was effective. According to the Travel Channel, it got to the point that in 1746, the ruling Danish king banned using Grýla as a threat of discipline. The Yule Cat, though, seems to be a much newer addition, though just how much newer is a matter of some controversy. Per the University of Iceland, the cat doesn't really show up in written folklore until 1862, when it appeared in a book of poems and fairy tales. The only problem is that, in that book, it's basically an entirely different creature, not specifically a cat, not part of the Yule Troll family thing, and not specifically targeting children. There, according to the university, it's really just a beast that either eats people who didn't get clothes for Christmas, or just steals their dinner. The Daily Star vaguely proposes that the beast might have been specifically concocted to frighten farm workers into processing wool on time, which would earn them the reward of new clothes, and maybe not being eaten. The cat didn't become a cat and get permanently lumped in with Grýla and company until 1932. That's when they all appeared as a family unit in a book of Christmas poems. There is some basis in Icelandic culture and others for an evil figure who righteously punishes naughty children. Our understanding of Saint Nick here in the States is very much not how other countries do the thing. The Yule goat myth in Sweden is actually a pretty close analogy to the Yule Cat. According to author Sue Weaver, the quote, dark and scary demonic Yule goat was said to roam the 17th century countryside on Christmas night, demanding food. The origins of that story lie in a pagan parable that early Christians decided was satanic, as these things often went. The University of Iceland wrote that their Yule Cat could have been adapted from those beliefs, since cats are, like goats, often associated with the occult. Then, in turn, the myth could have blended with the Celtic traditions about new clothes being good luck. There's also the thought that the whole cat thing might have been a figure of speech made literal. To, quote, dress the cat or, quote, do the cat is an Icelandic idiom for those who don't change their clothes. So, the Icelandic folklorist Arne Bjorsen has proposed that a fairy tale author somewhere along the way heard that figure of speech and either had a great idea or got very confused. Whatever the case may be, from 1932 onward, the Yule Cat took on a life of its own and became a staple of Icelandic holiday traditions. According to the University of Iceland, quote, "The Yule Cat has been a staple figure of the festivities in Iceland, found in Christmas decorations, illustrations, and school plays." We would also be remiss if we didn't point out that there is a Björk song about the Yule Cat. It's technically a cover of another artist adaptation of one of those poems from the 1930s, but for what it's worth, it feels very Björky. Also very Björky is the controversy that seems to have followed the Yule Cat into the modern day. The thing that pops up in news archives time and time again is the public art display honoring the Yule Cat, which, inevitably, splits public opinion. We're thinking specifically of a sculpture erected for the holiday season in downtown Reykjavik. A giant cat, probably 2 or 3 people tall, made of Christmas lights and a black metal frame. The Getty images that we've seen depict it with glowing red eyes and a paw outstretched, claws out, as if ready to swipe an ungrateful child right off the sidewalk. It also has extremely large and extremely sharp-looking and realistic teeth, which feel a little unnecessary, but hey, we are not artists. So, the sculpture is a little scary, which is one thing, but it also provoked a political conversation. In November 2018, when the sculpture was new, the Reykjavik Grapevine reported that the local government was catching flack about the sculpture. In part, this was because the city of Reykjavik had spent roughly $30,000 to install and rent the cat. The designers, an Austrian company, still technically owned it. The other problem was that, as a city council member pointed out, the message of the Yule Cat story hasn't exactly aged well. Lots of children, including many in Reykjavik, don't get new clothes for Christmas, not because they've been very bad, but because their parents or caretakers simply can't afford it. The council member proposed that there might be some misplaced priorities with the sculpture. The city spent many thousands of dollars on renting it, while also employing the most minimum wage workers in the country. And also the mythical cat kind of preferentially eats poor children through no fault of their own. We are very much pro-Yule Cat, and even we could admit that there's some troubling stuff to think about there. And yet, your problematic fave, the Yule Cat, has persisted. The sculpture does still show up today, for the record, every Christmas season. It gets reinstalled in downtown Reykjavik, and we assume that there are still parents out there who threaten their kids with no new clothes and a one-way trip down a giant cat's esophagus. The question is, should that still be okay? If a king in the 1700s could see that gorilla was too scary and too cruel to use to coax children into good behavior, well, we could absolutely understand why some would take issue with the Yule Cat today. It is, fundamentally, mean-spirited to all children, and especially to children who won't get new clothes because of circumstances far outside their control. So, maybe the Yule Cat is a weird but fascinating myth that's better left in the past. Or it might be, except for one strange thing. There is a much kinder interpretation of the Yule Cat myth that is worth mentioning. We would not say that it seems super common based on what we found in our newspaper archives. But if it is, we think that the kids of Iceland are going to be all right. According to Smithsonian magazine, quote, "Presumably the threat of being eaten by the Yule Cat is also meant to inspire generosity in children who don't have to fret about it, as giving clothes to the less fortunate would grant them protection from the monstrous feline." We did find a few other mentions of this loophole around the internet. Mostly it's described as a relatively modern take on the Yule Cat tradition, an acknowledgement that, yes, this is a little messed up, but it can also be a compelling way to teach kids about charity and compassion. Interestingly, given how sparse information is about this particular version of the story, it does appear to have been adopted by none other than the city of Reykjavik. According to the city's official English language website, you can indeed save someone else from being eaten by extending some kindness and charity. It is basically settled canon. After laying out all the ways in which the Yule Cat and its family could cause you harm, the city says, quote, "Whether this is true or not, no one knows. But what we can say for sure is that if we all help each other out in the good spirit of the season, no one should have to be gobbled up by the cat." That's right, strangers. No one should have to be gobbled up by that cat. Except maybe Grilla. She does sound sort of like she deserves it, and if we're being honest, we think it would be sort of poetic. We hope you'll join us next time for another premium exclusive episode of One Strange Thing. Oh, and if you wouldn't mind, please take a moment to rate and review our show in your favorite podcast app. It helps us find more listeners.